Hello and welcome to Talking Politics Q&A. I'm Paul Brand and Anushka is joining me one last time to answer the political questions that matter to you. And as this is Anushka's final episode with us, there might be a couple of special questions just for her at the end, which she doesn't yet know about. But first, among our listeners and viewers, Dominic emailed to say, we'll all miss Anushka. He also had a question for us concerning the arson attacks on properties connected to Keir Starmer. So he says, why were the attacks not the top news story across the board? What decides what becomes a top story? And Anushka, I'll come to you. I mean, I suppose my initial thought is part of the reason why we're not saying loads about it is because there are now active court proceedings because 3 men have been charged. So unfortunately, as much as journalists would love to be able to say lots and lots of things, sometimes we have to respect we always have to respect the court process. Therefore, there's not much we can say, and that's partly probably why it hasn't reached the top of news bulletins. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess on day one, there weren't active proceedings, so at that point you arguably could have done. But yes, we always tread very carefully when we think there are about to be active court proceedings. I think also you don't really understand quite what's happened. You don't necessarily understand the motivation in time to make a decision to be able to go quite hard on these things. And obviously what makes a story like that more or less interesting really strongly depends on the motivation and how much it's linked to attacks that we're seeing all over the place towards MPs. We cover attacks against MPs a lot. I've done a lot of kind of quite deep reporting on that, but it is quite difficult to do. I've had briefings here with the security teams in Parliament, both in the job here, but also I'm chair of the press gallery, so chair of the journalists for this year who work inside Parliament. And there's a lot of stuff they don't want us to say because it reveals things about the types of things that MPs might be doing to protect themselves. And I think more broadly than this case itself, that's often why a case does or does not capture the media's attention. It's often what the police decide they're going to do in terms of providing us with information, because sometimes it will be helpful for a case for it to receive a lot of publicity, sometimes less so. I mean, that said, I think there are also some less worthy reasons why some things get to the top of the news agenda and some things do not. And you know, if there is some frustration in the question, I recognise it. But I think in this case, it was quite a difficult one to go very hard on without having the information that then only came once the case was active.
I suppose one mitigating factor is that Keir Starmer, as far as we know, wasn't in any imminent danger himself. He wasn't at the properties that are alleged to have been attacked by these individuals. So I guess, you know, I think it would have been a different dynamic if we'd seen a real threat to his personal safety, in one of the, in number 10 or something like that.
Although, other people may have been there. But yes, I agree with you.
Well,
yeah.
True. Yeah, true. He's not the only important person. His life isn't the only important life, of course. Right, let's move on before we say something that might get ourselves into trouble with the courts. And Harold on X says, does reform have the discipline and commitment to genuinely deliver local services? I mean, a lot of people are hoping, aren't they, in other political parties, Anushka, that reform sort of mess up because now they've got responsibility and power in local government and in the mayoralties that they won't deliver, and then people will not vote for them in the general election. What do you think?
Well, I do think it's a massive challenge, and I think that one of the things that has led to other parties getting themselves in trouble, becoming unpopular, is actually the difficulty of governing. It's very easy to oppose, it's very hard to govern, and actually when Labour first came into power, not long after, I was speaking to someone who was a senior media person for the Conservative government, and they were slightly rubbing their hands in glee saying, I told you it's actually really hard when you're in there. Now, reform are controlling some of the most difficult councils in the country, where there's been a lot of frustration among the public, and they're delivering services at a time that it's really hard to deliver them. We've reported on this loads. I've spent a lot of time in areas where reform did really well, including Kent, for example, massive and growing adult social services and children's services bills, trying to do all of that without cutting services is basically impossible. I've not been to a council in the country where a chief exec has not told me that they've been forced to make difficult decisions. In Kent, it was taking money out of the roads budget. Well, that means you can't fill potholes. When you can't fill potholes, that annoys people. Others taking money out of the parks budgets or the libraries budgets. It is going to be really difficult. I think you're right that other politicians want them to trip up. But what I think is true is that it is going to be a challenge. And in the next set of elections, they're going to be judged on how they actually performed.
There'll be some interesting dynamics as well, because I know in some of the council areas they're looking at taking legal action to, for example, not be able to house migrants in those council areas that Reform now controls. So it's going to be kind of an interesting test of where national powers and local powers lie and what the line is between them. That brings me on to my last question, which is from an anonymous YouTuber who says, politics is in a very toxic mess right now. It is really hard to see a bright future with the current systems in place. I'm an optimist. I can still see a bright future, but I can understand why other people can't. It does, as we've already just touched on, it feels very difficult at the moment with the cost of living crisis and the fact that the government doesn't seem to have a lot of resource. What do you think? I mean, do you think that there is any light at the end of the tunnel? Inflation's gone up this week, but economic growth has also been revised up a bit. I mean, it feels like maybe things are getting a little bit better.
I think the issue is it's what you feel like, it's what your experience is like. And we've come to an area which does feel, or a time which does feel quite dark for a lot of people. On the Peston programme this week, we were looking at poverty rates. They're incredibly high for some types of families, large families, for instance. And people are really struggling to heat their homes, to buy food, to pay their bills. But, you don't even need to be at the bottom of the income pile to be struggling right now. I speak to people in Downing Street who say you can actually learn quite a lot in a city like London and still be really feeling the pinch right now. And then there are your other experiences. I'm one of, I'm sure, many parents who gets requests from a local state school to pay regularly towards them because they say they basically can't do the basics on the money that they're getting from government. Sure, like many others as well. I recently sat for 13 hours in A&E with my, older parents, and it was not a nice experience. And people are feeling really, really glum, and they need to see these things get better. I think in Downing Street they realise that. And one of the lessons they're learning or hoping to learn from what happened to Joe Biden in America is that, in a way, the macro situation isn't what people care about. What they care about is their day-to-day lives, and that has to be improved. But I also do think they can set the tone. And I mentioned in a recent episode sitting in the Downing Street garden and watching Keir Starmer deliver a speech last summer. It was dubbed the "things can only get worse" speech because it was really, really quite pessimistic. And I think one thing that has changed since then is that Labour MPs have said to the Prime Minister, you cannot be that pessimistic, and that there is a slightly more hopeful tone. Although I don't know what you think about this, Paul, but I think it's really hard for there to be a really hopeful tone when they're constantly attacking each other, especially at a time when trust in politics is already so low.
I thought it was interesting that this week, he was talking, the Prime Minister, about pegging a potential reversal in that winter fuel allowance cut to the performance of the economy. I mean, to me, that was maybe him saying, look, there are little treats maybe at the end of this painful period. There are little tidbits that I can dole out. If we can just keep the economy growing, if we can do what we promised we were going to do, I promise you there will be rewards later on. Even though, obviously, it's not much of a reward to say, here's the winter fuel return that we were cut in the first place.
I won't take the thing that I took off before.
Exactly. But I wonder whether there'll be other areas where that starts to creep in, and he says actually the economic situation's improved enough that I can raise an income tax threshold here or there or whatever it might be. So yeah, I guess it all comes back to the economy, right? That everything comes back to the economy. Anyway, Anushka, finally we've got one last questioner. Let's play a clip from him.
Anushka, this is our last Talking Politics podcast as a team. As you know, I'm absolutely gutted you're off, although you're going to have the absolute time of your life in Washington. I mean, my goodness, there is no bigger story in the world right now than Donald Trump. So I've got a couple of questions for you, one looking back, one looking forward. First of all, looking back, highs and lows of working with us here at ITV, and if you want to personalise it, you can say the highs and lows of working with me if you feel that's appropriate. And I suppose, secondly, whether you've got a plan. This is a sort of, what is your mental health plan for America? Because the problem, I find, dealing with Trump, even at this remove, unbelievably stressful. I can just feel when I wake up in the morning and I see the latest thing that he's said or done, my stress levels going through the absolute roof. And I'm just about beginning to understand the rhythm of how you report on his world-changing presidency. But you're going to be absolutely at the cliff edge. So what is your strategy for staying sane?
I haven't got one. I need to come up with a strategy, a mental health strategy. Oh, bless Robert. Oh, my highs and lows of working here are just like, well, there are no lows. I can't think of, there must be. But it's just been absolutely incredible. I mean, to pick out a few of the things that I absolutely love doing more than anything else, I think probably COP26, that big environment conference up in Glasgow, where I was working with our former producer Dominique, and I had to try and doorstep. What's amazing about these COP conferences is there's just world leaders wandering around, and you have to try and doorstep them. And I remember her just sort of like throwing me in front of someone and like shouting as I went past, "The Prime Minister of Denmark!" And then I'd be in front of them and I'd be asking them a question. And then I texted the desk and I said, we've got the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And they were like, "Can you do a bit better than that?" And I was like, what? I had to,
we need a G7 leader.
Bigger world leaders, where I did actually have my amazing thing, which is there was like thousands of us shouting questions at Joe Biden. And he turned to me and he answered, which I was very excited about. But then I also did the thing which you should never do on when you're waiting to try and doorstep someone, which was shout "yes" into the camera. Luckily, we cut that off. And look, I've had so many highs. Like the travel has been incredible. With Iona Napier, who's another producer here, we were remembering going to Bali. I mean, what a place to go with Rishi Sunak, doing the 10 o'clock news live at 6 a.m. on a beautiful beach, and then going for a swim afterwards. Been to New York. I've been to Washington DC. I've had such a great time here. As for Robert, I mean, he is the kindest, loveliest, most generous colleague, and he has just been such a star the entire time that I've been working with him on the Peston programme, which is longer than I've been here, and also while I've been here. I've loved every minute with him, and there are loads of professional highlights, but one of the things I used to love was when we used to do these mad Twitter breaks on his programme, and they got madder and madder, and they would bring in like football goals, and we would like play football in the 2 minutes of the break, or basketball, or whatever it might be that week. It's been amazing. And as for the mental health, well, my 12-year-old son may not be a huge Donald Trump fan. He said to me, "I don't want to go and live in Donald Trump's America." And I said, "But Donald Trump's going to make it really, really interesting." And he said, "For you, Mum, not for me." So yeah, my children are not the best pleased about the move. So the most focus right now is on how to make their mental health positive before we go, because they're going to miss their mates.
Oh, of course they will. But once they get their heads around American food and how much sugar there is in America, I'm sure you'll be able to talk them around with a few treats. Anushka, we've loved having you. We're going to really miss you.
Here.
Everyone here loves you at ITV News, and we'll all be wishing you the best, even if you're working for the competition when you're out in America.
Thank you so much.
So that's it from us this week, and of course from Anushka. This is the bit when we normally urge people to subscribe. So final word to you, Anushka. Why should people continue to listen to this podcast, even in your absence?
Because it's brilliant and it's insightful, and I'm going to be listening to it every week to hear all your amazing reporting from you, Paul, from Robert, from Tom and beyond.
Excellent answer. Please subscribe. We'll see you soon.